Blum bests British board. Lacey launches latest league. An analyst analyzes astronauts. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline September 2023. For our feature story, just how do you win a diplomacy tournament? Well, there are some pat answers to this like practice, 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 or you can't win if you don't play. But let's delve deeper into this subject by asking folk who actually win things how the heck they do it. Later in this program, we'll interview 3 recent winners at events played in 3 different formats to get their advice on how you can join them in, as the segment is called, the Winner's Circle. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. All right, now, it's September, which means that the summer diplomacy tournament season in North America is over. But now the awesome fall lineup of events is fast approaching. To start, we have the 17th annual Weasel Moot in Chicago, a 3-round tournament held September 30 and October 1st under the capable leadership of Sabi Ahuja. And then just 1 week later, the Liberty Cup tournament takes place in Philadelphia, with Bill Hackenbracht again serving as tournament director. Rounding out the NADF fall schedule will be Dave Malensky running the DIP event at Carnage in Vermont, the last weekend of October. Links to the web pages for all 3 of these events are in the show notes below. If you live in North America or beyond even, I hope you will see your way to one or more of these awesome face-to-face extravaganzas. Not only will the events be fun and all that, there are buku DB&I points available to be awarded in these tournaments. And the chances to gain more points after that for this season will be few and far between. And now let's move from face-to-face tournaments to awesome news in the world of face-to-face league play. The Dallas-Fort Worth DIP Fall-Winter League has announced its formation to begin play September 30th at Common Ground Games on Inwood Road in Dallas, Texas. To quote the release from hobbyist Rob Lacey, players can play as many league games as they wish, but will not be playing the same country twice. Players will be ranked according to the league points earned in each game played. The more games played, the greater the potential to earn points. A player may do well in some games and poorly in others, or consistently average in all of them and still achieve a good overall score. There will be awesome swag and product support for participants, as well as prizes for the league. And you need not bring your own copy of the game to the game days. After that initial game on September 30th, other scheduled game days include October 14th, October 18th, November 11th, and December 3rd. For more information, see the link provided below. In variant news, because of the alliance recently formed between the Nexus and Nexus League's Discord servers, another Discord server focused on variant design and development has been accordingly changed to the name Nexus Variants. Moderator Keith Worstel, known as Superstition Online, has also enhanced the content of his server on Discord to function as a hub for diplomacy variant enthusiasts of every kind. There is now a channel on the server for variant design help, allowing aspiring variant creators to tap into a brain trust of experienced hobbyists in that area. Also featured is a channel for the recruitment of players to test newer variants, as well as just to have fun playing the more established titles. For those ready to dive into more specific areas of variant creation, there are channels on this server regarding drafting, power setup, power balancing, refining the map, and other topics. Join the Nexus Variant server using the invite link provided below, and happy varianting. Speaking of Nexus Leagues, the 3rd season of their extended deadline gunboat tournament recently concluded, with Season 2 winner Phoenix 77 repeating as the champion of Season 3. Phoenix edged Varmint and Ben Kelman for this victory, and they came in 2nd and 3rd. While Season 4 of the tournament is actually already underway as you hear this, those interested in competing in the Gunboat Season 5 on Nexus Leagues should note that it starts on October 2nd. You can join the Nexus League server at the link provided in the show notes. In other extended deadline tournament news, Riaz Varani has won the inaugural season of Gunboat Tournament on the Olympus Discord server, while Bradley Grace won the Season 1 main event for regular Diplomacy on the Olympus server. Bradley Grace will be interviewed later in this episode of Deadline. From Down Under, we have the news that a new Discord server has been created called the Snake Pit. According to primary organizer Josh Hennessy, the primary purpose of the Snake Pit will be to organize casual face-to-face games on Sundays with time zones particularly friendly to those in Oceania and Asia. In addition, the server will host an annual virtual face-to-face tournament in early May, which will have unique rules regarding its top board, both to encourage players to play for big board tops during the preliminary rounds, as well as giving smaller powers on the top board a path for victory should that top board game end with a shared board top. A link to this new server is provided below. In other virtual face-to-face news, Saren Kwok just won the top board of the VWDC Summer Classic on September 2nd, with Jackson Robertson second and Ed Sullivan bringing up third. Saren Kwok is also an interview subject later in this broadcast. Now, let's take a trip around the world of YouTube channels and other diplomacy content creators to report to you on the latest and greatest new diplomacy products from whom we call our DBN media partners. Florida Man recently released a new video on his YouTube channel that regards the Austrian-Russian alliance, sometimes called either the Peppermint Alliance or the Astronaut. He discussed the AR attack on Turkey, how best to utilize the Austrian fleet, options for relations with Italy, and how to avoid the mistrust which commonly breaks the AR alliance in the midgame. Also, one recent edition of the weekly Diplomacy Briefing newsletter featured not only a spectacular article by World DipCon winner Jamal Blakarli about that win from his perspective, but also included an insightful piece from Chris Brand about decisions he made during the game, and particularly at the end, which affected, of course, the outcome. If you are not already a subscriber to the briefing, you certainly should be, so there is a link to their website provided below. And now, how about some European face-to-face news? The Swiss Diplomacy Championship concluded the first weekend of September, with Italian Davide Cleopadre taking the top spot. Davide will also be spearheading the World DipCon in Milan for 2024, which is much anticipated. Coming in second at the Swiss Open was Alex Lebedev of Russia and Steve Personini of the host country Switzerland taking the third position. Other countries of origin represented were Germany, the United States, Australia, and the Netherlands. The 2023 SpireCon tournament, also known as the second Chesterfield Diplomacy Open, will take place October 14th and 15th in England, in, Chesterfield. There will be rounds both that Saturday and Sunday under the shadow of the famous 800-year-old crooked spire of the SpireCon name. Chris Woolgar is the primary organizer and can be contacted using his email, chris@spirecon.uk. And then there's the 2023 edition of the European Diplomacy Championships, the EDC, to be held November 24th through 26th in Paris. More details on that event will be shared in the next episode of Deadline. In virtual league news, the latest round of the Tour of Britain virtual face-to-face tournament just concluded on Saturday, September the 9th. Going into that round, the two frontrunners were Maryland's Jason Bennett and Bradley Grace of the UK in the race to dethrone the 2022 King of Britain, who is Florida resident Tim Crosby. That latest Tour of Britain game day resulted in a board top by Mikey Bloom and an elimination for Bennett, while a second place showing put Bradley Grace at the top of the current leaderboard. Jason Bennett is currently second, with Bloom third, and another 3 rounds of play to come. The other English-language virtual face-to-face league, which is the Virtual Diplomacy League, or VDL, plays its next set of games on September 23rd, also on that same VWDC Discord server that the Tour of Britain uses. Currently leading the VDL in its fourth season of play is Frenchman Nicolas Taillet, with Jackson Roberts of California and Michigan's Ben Kelman lapping at his heels. You can join either of these leagues at any time. Just join the VWDC Discord server or go to the DBN website linked below for more information. Often in the past, Deadline has presented you, the viewers, with in-depth interviews of diplomacy tournament winners, a segment which we have called the Winner's Circle. For this month's feature presentation, we are pleased to give you interviews not just with one champion, but with 3 recent tournament winners, highlighting all 3 major formats of diplomacy play: face-to-face, virtual face-to-face, and extended deadline events. First up, we have Australian Jamal Blackharley, winner of the 2023 World DipCon Championship held last month face-to-face in Bangkok, Thailand. Jamal, welcome to Deadline.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Sure. All right, first of all, let me congratulate you again on your World DipCon victory. It just needs to be said over and over again, I think.
Thank you. I will eventually tire of hearing it, but not quite yet. So yeah, you can keep saying it. It's good.
I understand. Yes. Well, I usually start off by asking folks how they got into diplomacy, but I just heard what I consider to be a very charming interview with you done by Amby and Kaner over at the Diplomacy Games podcast, and we're going to put a link to that down in the show notes. That interview included a recorded conversation with you talking to the very guy who introduced you to the game, which I thought was awesome. Tell our Deadline audience about that history, if you would.
Yeah, so I learnt diplomacy in history class. So in Australia, at least, at the end of the semester, there's always a few weeks where the teacher puts on a documentary and you just kind of do a bit of nothing because you've finished all your coursework. So instead of putting on a documentary one year, my history teacher, we'd just done World War One. And he decided to teach us how to play diplomacy. So he cracked out the board and we spent a few weeks as a class learning how to play diplomacy and, as a educational tool for the history and geography and the power dynamics of the area. I got really into it. I got so into it, I started a diplomacy club at my school where we used to play. And then it just kind of took off from there. When I became an adult, I joined the Melbourne hobby. I was very terrible at the game and, got a little better since then.
Yeah, it's amazing how many folks were exposed to this by a teacher or a professor. I had an entire episode about this a couple of years ago with a panel of people, one of whom was a teacher, is a teacher in Washington State, and a couple of them are students. And it's just amazing how much that can affect you going forward and how much has it affected our hobby that we've got teachers out there introducing people to the game.
Yeah, for sure.
So how did you go from student learning diplomacy in class to adult going to a World Diplomacy Championship?
Well, so as I said, I kind of stumbled across the Melbourne kind of arm of the Australian diplomacy hobby in my early 20s. I'd played a little bit in high school. I'd moved back to Melbourne. I ran into the DANS website, the Australian Diplomacy Association of Australia and New Zealand. There was a house game going on. I rocked up to that game. I played averagely and then proceeded to stab Steve Litton for 1 dot on the final turn for no apparent reason, because that was just the silly way I played back then. And then, yeah, from there, I think I really enjoyed it. The group of players in Australia were really great. So I enjoyed spending time with them. I had a lot of growth to do. I was, as I said, I was not very good at diplomacy back then. But managed to kind of find my way and get some, play with really strong, solid players and learn and evolve and develop my game. Up to the point where here we are, 2023, the World DipCon's back. It's relatively in my own backyard in Southeast Asia. So I thought, why not? Let's go and have a crack.
Makes a lot of sense. Australians have been traveling to tournaments all over the world for a long time. When I ran World DipCon in 1990, I think there were 3 Australians there. I mean, of course, that's back in the old days. Australia actually had a very vibrant hobby. I'm hoping that will continue to grow and develop now. All right. Well, before we talk about your victory itself, give us an idea of what it was like to attend a World DipCon, just sort of as an overall question.
Mm. I mean, it was amazing. So this was my first ever international tournament. I'd never actually traveled for diplomacy before. So there was a kind of novel thing in that, you know, taking time off work, going overseas, traveling for a diplomacy tournament. All of my work colleagues thought I was crazy. I had some other colleagues in Thailand at about the same time on holidays, just sitting on a beach, and they were like, "What are you doing?" But it was great. It was phenomenal. I you know, rocked up in Bangkok a few days early, acclimatized, you know, did a bit of sightseeing. But you know, pretty quickly connected with all the other players. You know, we spent a fair bit of time together as a group. You know, a lot of us were staying in the same hotel. But also, you know, we were all there to play diplomacy, obviously, but also all there to really enjoy ourselves and have a great time overseas and really take this opportunity to travel the world playing a board game that we all love. It was a life-changing experience in a lot of different ways. And it was genuinely some of the most enjoyable travel experience I've had. And I've done a lot of travel.
Well, I'm sure you had some expectations going in, but was there anything in particular that surprised you about the experience?
I think probably what surprised me is actually the genuine connection I managed to form with a lot of the other players. So, you know, you work with people on the board, you obviously spend a lot of time with people off the board. And, you know, some of my closest friends are diplomacy players, but I don't think I was ready for how much you'd rock up and there would be people that not only share a hobby, but also share an approach to life and share a way of going about things and a personability that's required for the game. And, you know, I met a handful of people who I looked at and went, you know what, if we keep hanging out for the next few years and meet each other at tournaments or whatever else, this person's going to become a really genuine friend of mine. And I wasn't expecting that layer. I was expecting to meet nice people because, you know, we're all nice people, but the kinship I felt with the people at the tournament was probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, I have said before that to me, going to conventions is really about the people. It's about seeing old friends, making new friends. It's really what brings, certainly what brings people like me back as opposed to the gameplay itself. Tell us anything that stands out in your mind regarding players whom you met or any off the board experiences that you had that particularly stick out.
So, I mean, there was a habit we'd always do at the World DipCon where, you know, we'd play a game. The games would start in the evening and then they'd finish at around 11 o'clock or midnight. So we'd go to the bar downstairs afterwards. And that was always a really great experience. I mean, there were heaps. I mean, I remember rocking up the day before the tournament. And, you know, I was catching up with a friend of mine from Australia and we end up meeting Doc Binder in the lobby of his hotel and, you know, watching AFL football in his hotel room whilst the Matildas are playing. We've got our phones and there's just like a genuine connection moment there. One of the big ones was, you know, there was one of the really top class players there who unfortunately didn't make the top board. There was a moment on the Saturday evening after it was clear that he wasn't going to make the top board where I kind of pulled him aside and I said, "Hey mate, I'm nervous. I don't know what I'm doing here on the top board. You know, can I buy you a beer? Can you talk me through this? Can you help me kind of work through some of this?" And, you know, he put his time aside. We went away from the group and had a conversation and he told me some really key, quite genuinely helpful things that really helped my play. And the fact that someone who was ostensibly an opponent is happy to go out of their way and actually connect and genuinely, you know, actually spend time helping you learn and grow as a player is phenomenal in the middle of a tournament.
Yeah, there are some people that are in the diplomacy hobby, have been in the diplomacy hobby, who are not good sports, but there ain't too many of them.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I hate to put you on the spot, but among those you met for the first time, tell us someone that you'd like to highlight in particular because meeting them stands out in your mind.
Oh,
yes, I know it's an unfair question. I know
I can't pick favorites, David. I can't pick favorites. I mean, I think there are probably maybe 3 or 4 people who really stand out in my mind, and you know, I won't be baited. I'm not going to name favorites, but I think those people probably know who they are. I think, you know, they're people that I did form a real genuine connection with, and you know, this goes beyond just the play. I mean, these are people I all worked with during the tournament. We played well together, but there are people that I think you know, there's people sometimes where you walk into a room, you just meet someone for the first time, and you know, you lock eyes across the diplomacy board, and you just look at that person, you go, "Yep, you're my kind of person." You know, there was maybe 3 or 4 people that I think were like that, and again, I think they know who they are. And it extended beyond that to who they were outside of the game. So we managed to spend time together outside of the games. We managed to connect over beers or over massages or over coffee in the morning or whatever else, and actually managed to share something of ourselves and of how we share an approach to the hobby and to the game and to who we are. And, you know, I think that, as I said at the start, those are really genuine connections. And, you know, yeah, I mean, there are more people than I would have thought who I really felt like I formed that with.
Yeah, that's a great answer to what was obviously an unfair and a tricky question. All right, let's dive right into the gameplay. Obviously, there is full coverage of all these games available on the broadcast we did here on DBN, and we're going to get to the top board later. But in your preliminary games, are there particular alliances or players you'd like to mention from that that part of the convention?
Yes. I mean, so I think in each of the preliminary games, I managed to find a key ally and work with them for most of the game. You know, I think it, you know, it was mentioned on the broadcast. I'm a pretty big alliance player. You know, I'll have to go back and check, but I don't think I topped any of my boards. I think all of my boards I drew equal top with my main ally in that. So, you know, I mean, for each of them, for each board, there is someone I can point to and go, yep, that was my person, right? So in board 1, it was Gnome, and who was in Germany, and I was in France. For board 2, it was Brad Grace from the UK, but then also Dan Lester was part of a kind of broader alliance we had going on there as well. In board 3, it was Sasha, who's a local Thai-based player, but I think he's from Germany. But then we also had Chris and Gavin, you know, we were kind of working with on that board as well. And on the final board, it was Hunter. And, you know, so each of those players, I think, you know, I think we were able to form quite a genuine, proper alliance. And we worked it in such a way where our goals could align and we could actually work towards the same goals. And yeah, there wasn't this kind of sense of, oh, I've got to get ahead of my ally. I've got to make sure I'm finishing 2 or 3 centers ahead for the bonus points. That, you know, I think I was quite happy that I worked out a way to play the tournament that wasn't about backstabbing my allies and wasn't about getting one up on them, but was genuinely about working with my allies all the way.
The interesting thing about that list you just gave is that those players are not cookie cutters of each other. Those are players who play differently anyway. I mean, Hunter Catcher plays very differently from Gnome, for example. And Chris Brand, for that matter. None of those 3 have exactly the same style, but you're able to work with all of them.
Yeah, and I mean, and maybe that speaks to my style of play, right? Where, you know, I mean, a lot of what I try and work on is this idea that I want to be able to work with anybody. You know, I think I said this in my speech at the end of the tournament, but there was nobody I felt like I couldn't work with. There was no one I felt like if I drew next to them on a board, I'd be like, oh, well, I just have to work with the other person here. Everybody I felt like I had an ability to work with in a way that we could work together. And it was different for each person, right? You have to adapt how you work with each player. But, you know, that's what makes a good diplomacy player, right? The ability to work with whoever you're with and play the position on the board, but also the people you're on the board with.
Yeah, here is all what I've got to say to that. Well, tell us a little bit about how the competition differed from other events or other face-to-face experiences you've had.
I mean, it was a very strong competition. I mean, so Australia has actually genuinely has quite strong competition pretty consistently. You know, you can rock up to an Australian tournament, you can rock up to a PoppyCon, and you can get a board of 7 of the best players in the world just because that's the board you draw. So I definitely feel like I was kind of raised in a diplomacy school where you played against good players, and I think that was helpful. But, you know, coming to World DipCon, it's a next level, right? Because not only is it the people who care enough about this to fight for the World Championships, but also the people who care enough about this to take time off, to invest their time and money into traveling, into being there. You know, really, it's, you know, it was a smallish field. I think there was 30 or 40 players, but I looked around and there wasn't a bad player in the room. And so the quality of play was just of a next level. And it was, you know, was exciting. I think I play better with better players. I'm not a newbie whisperer. I'm not somebody that, that works off players who maybe don't know the game so well and uses them to benefit my own needs. I actually think I genuinely work better with good players around me because we understand the game together. And so, that was a whole nother way of doing things. And I had to adjust very quickly to that. But it was exciting. It was great.
I'm sure it was. All right. Going into the top board, what was your strategy for the power selection, or maybe your strategy in general going into the top board?
So I will say it's still hitting me that I'm the world champion at diplomacy, but maybe I'm the world champion at the Paris method. I don't know. There's something in that. I spent more time on my power selection than on any other move in the game.
Which is amazing, because when I'm in that situation, I literally pull a thing out of the box and just do it randomly. But so that's just, I'm so old school. I can't, but I want to hear this because it's awesome.
So, I mean, I think I like the Paris method because it plays to my strengths, right? If you think about the diplomacy strategy and the tactics, I'm a diplomacy heavy player. I play on the negotiations. That's where my strengths lie. So the Paris method plays into that a little bit because, I think I end up picking 5th. So, I'm not getting the early selections. I'm not going to get France. I'm not going to get, Italy, because Chris Brand is picking ahead of me and Chris will always pick Italy. But, I come in there with not many selections left. I think I've got Germany, Austria, and Turkey left when I can choose. And there's a bit of thought I place on where have other players chosen. So, quite quickly in my head, I look over, Germany is the obvious choice there, right? If you're thinking about top board play, Germany is maybe the easy choice in that scenario. But I look at that situation and I go, you've got Peter McNamara in France and you've got Brandon Fogel in England, both of which phenomenally good players, both of which I can work with, but also both of which who are probably good enough to decide maybe they want to work together against me. And so I'm not 100% sure that I'm winning out of the kind of the three-way negotiations that are going on there. So then I'm kind of leaning towards an Eastern power at this point because I've got Chris and Doc, who I have worked with before, just by virtue of the tournament, I've done a few more games with them. And I think, to me, the thought then turns to who's picking after me. So I know Gavin and Eddie are both picking after me, and actually more so than who do I want to play, because I'm fairly comfortable playing anybody. My thought is, where do I want Gavin to be and where do I want Eddie to be? And I pick Austria, which I'm aware is a little bit of an out-of-the-box choice. It's not your inherent pick in that situation, but I think I pick Austria because I'm thinking about, well, if I pick Austria, what will Gavin pick? And I think Gavin's going to pick Turkey, and I think then Eddie will pick Germany, and I'm pretty happy with that split of who's there. I'm happy to put Eddie into the hot seat with the Peter and Brandon situation, and I'm happy to have Gavin in Turkey with someone who, again, is another person I know I can work with. And I'm tossing up between that and then maybe picking Turkey, but I know Turkey gets jumped on top boards, and in that scenario, maybe Gavin picks Germany and Eddie picks Austria, and that's slightly worse. But I mean, a lot of it is gut feeling. But I think I just sat there and I looked more at who was picking after me than who was picking before me, and I went, it's weird, but okay, I think Austria is the right choice.
Obviously, it turned out pretty well for you. Just by definition. Well, obviously you won the whole bloody thing, but to give us an overview of how the top board went from your perspective. Obviously you don't have to talk about everything, but it may be a general trend of how the top board went.
Yeah, I mean, it was the most intense game of diplomacy I've ever played in my life. I mean, they say top boards are a different beast, and they really are. The truisms of the top board are not the truisms of regular play. And so, it was really tense. It was really stressful. I think I spent a lot of time on the top board trying to just make sure I centered myself and trying to make sure I stayed calm, because I think that's maybe one of my strongest points in diplomacy, is being able to stay calm when the board is kind of chaotic around you. And in Austria particularly, there's a chance I get jumped out of the gate here, right? I have to do a lot in the early years to make sure I can establish a position and make sure I have a game. But maybe the big thing I'm interested in talking about on that is that, you know, I think when you're playing with high quality players, and when you're playing on a top board in a time limited game where you know it's going to end at a certain point, you know, the game will break at some point, right? And I think probably for us in our top board, the game broke in 1908, in spring 1908.
Right.
But you know, if you look at up until fall 1907, winter 1907, it's pretty tight. It's pretty close. There's a lot of balance of power going on. There's a lot, you know, we've got some alliances working, but it's really, it's a tight pack. And then in spring 1908, the game just breaks. And I think for me, I think often people generally think about the game breaking strategically, and how will one person stab another person? How will an alliance fall apart and all of that? But I think for me, I kind of played with this kind of sense that the game could break strategically, but the game could also break tactically. Someone could order a terrible misorder and put themselves in a terrible position, and then suddenly the game's broken open. But also the game could break diplomatically. And I think, again, playing to my strengths, I realized by about 1906, 1907, I'd put myself in a position where if the game broke strategically, if that's how the game broke, I'm not necessarily winning there. You know, I don't think I'm in the best strategic position. I think Brandon in England and Gavin in Turkey are in a better position strategically if the game breaks in that way. But I think what I do is I place my money on the fact that the game might break diplomatically, and that the game might break on the negotiation side. And in that scenario, I'm in the better position. So essentially, I kind of look at where I'm at and I go, you know what? I've kind of got to make a bet here. I've kind of got to go back myself in one way or the other. And I think maybe the reason the result was as it was because I chose to place my play and the way that I approached the board. I chose to bet on the fact that the game would break diplomatically. And then it turned out that was how the game broke. And so that when that happened, I was best positioned to take advantage of that.
Well, you certainly were. Or at least it seemed to me like you were. Well, we are now, some period of time removed from this event. How does this accomplishment feel to you now after having a little bit more time for it to sink in?
It's still sinking in, but it's funny, right? I've been saying this to people back at home and people who don't play diplomacy, but it's weird because it's a board game, right? It's not real life. It's a board game, but I think this has genuinely changed my life. This is genuinely, I am a different person now to who I was 4 weeks ago before this happened. I don't think I approach life fundamentally differently, but I have it's clicked something in me. There's something internally that I've been working on for the past 5 years in terms of personal work and in terms of who I am as a person, and winning the WDC has just done the kind of final domino in whatever chain that is. And it feels like I understand myself and I understand the world around me in just a slightly different way and with a slightly different approach. And, part of that change is I can't fully explain it. I can't, tell you exactly what it is, but this has been a life-changing experience for me. And, it's something that I'm really grateful for and something I feel like I owe a debt of gratitude to the hobby for facilitating for me.
Well, it's a great thing to hear. And of course, I don't think we should be at all, afraid to say how important something like this is in our lives. It just is. And people have all sorts of things that are really important to them. And there are people that the most important thing to them is fishing, whatever. It doesn't matter. If you've got something that really speaks to what life is about for you and sort of warms your soul, then what difference does it make if it's a board game or something else? And I just think that's great. All right. Well, do you think there are lessons that you think this particular top board could teach the rest of us about tournament play, about top board play, or diplomacy in general?
Yeah, so again, I'm not fully up on the kind of the way that diplomacy is played in places outside of Australia too much. As you said, this is my first international tournament, but I think for me, one of the big things I learned here, and one of the things that I think I heard a lot from some of the American players and some of the European players, is that, the way that we went about it and the way that this top board played and all of that. I think to me, it shows that there are no truisms, that, you know, that the meta, so to speak, is not a real thing. Like there's no standard set of things that have to happen. There's no situational set of things that have to happen. You can always play the game you want to play. You know, I think the example I heard a lot is, you know, there's the truism that on top boards, you don't pick Turkey because you always have to defend Turkey and keep Turkey in the box. And, you know, you can't let Turkey get a start on a top board. I just won a top board by being Austria and allying with Turkey and building Turkey up to a similar center count to myself, right? Like that truism is not true. Like maybe I'm the exception, but like, you know, I think for me, what this tournament showed and what this top board showed is that, you know, there's a way of playing and there's an approach to playing that you know, you can write your own destiny. You can make something true if it's the right situation for you to do so. And it's not always about, you know, which power is bigger and which power is not, and how do you play this balance of power game. Sometimes it's about going, I can ally with this person, so I'm going to ally with this person. And even if that goes against all of the known truths, if that's the right thing for me, if that's what my gut is telling me how to play, then I should play that way.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I have said for years, you should not use the word always, ever, in talking about how to play this game. And one reason is because the meta, to the extent that it does exist, changes so much. It's so malleable over time. I mean, that it can really mess you up if you think you need to play a certain way and you have to play a certain way. It can really mess you up. So you're right. That's a great lesson to get. Let's get a little bit more philosophical here to conclude this. Why do you think diplomacy has such staying power as a game?
I think diplomacy has staying power as a game because I think it is just slightly different to all other board games, and it's slightly more, maybe it's slightly more like real life, or it's slightly more, it's different in some kind of way that I think speaks to real life in a different kind of way. So, I mean, the easy example is there's no chance element, right? There's no dice. Right. Most board games have dice or card draws or something where there's a level of random chance, and, you know, you need to kind of stack the odds in your favor. But at the end of the day, your opponent can roll a 6 and, you know, sorry, bad luck. Diplomacy doesn't have that, right? Diplomacy is all about, you know, it's completely controllable by the players on the board. And I think, you know, so I think that's a big element of it. But I also think the element of it's a social game, and it is the most social game. You know, there are other games that have come out that try to do a similar thing. You've got your Avalon, your Werewolf, your kind of your socially based games. But I don't think any other game truly gets at a social connection that, you know, someone described to me once that, you know, diplomacy is about how do you build trust in a situation that is inherently untrustworthy. You know, you rock up to a zero-sum game where I have to take something in order to win, and you've got to lose something in order for me to get that thing. So we're inherently not trusting each other. So how do we build trust? And I think if you can learn how to do that, and if you can learn the social skills and the personal skills to be a trustworthy person and to build that trust in that untrustworthy situation, I think, you know, that's a big deal, and that's a big deal for people who play it, and for people who get it. I think a light bulb goes off and they go, this is the game. This is how I want to, you know, spend my time and simulate life and do all these other things, because it's so different to everything else.
It really is. There's just no question about it. Well, let's broaden the discussion to the hobby instead of just the game. What do you think the strengths and the weaknesses of the hobby are? And I'm not saying that anyone like in your shoes or in my shoes is an expert at the hobby, and it's a big subject. But from your point of view, what do you think the strengths and the weaknesses of our diplomacy hobby might be?
I'll start with the weaknesses and then I'll go to the strengths, just because the weakness is very apparent to me. And the weakness is diversity. I want to explicitly call out that there was not a single female player at the World DipCon, and that at a World DipCon hosted in Asia, there were 2.5 Asian players. And that's not okay. Neither of those things are okay, particularly the gender balance and the gender equality issue. That is a massive weakness of our hobby. And it's a weakness that we need to address if we're ever going to get taken seriously, and a weakness that we need to address as a hobby if we're ever going to truly be a hobby that actually supports people in their lives in a really deep, genuine way and can support all people. You know, having a world championship that doesn't have any representation from 50% of the world is not an okay thing to have. And so that's a massive weakness. You know, I've had some conversations with some people about this at the World DipCon. I professionally, I work in a kind of gender equality, violence prevention space. I'm hoping to be able to put in some effort and some work to help change that and to help set the groundwork for that. You know, and that work needs to be done in collaboration with some of the really amazing, women leaders in this hobby. But, you know, that to me is the big glaring weakness of the hobby that we need to fix, and we need to fix that pretty quickly. But yeah, and look, in terms of strengths, so I think the strengths are some things we've spoken about in terms of, you know, we genuinely have good people here. You know, we genuinely have people that are personable, that care, that are intelligent, that want to, you know, that want to play a game in a way that is, you know, sure, it's cutthroat, sure, it's it involves a level of deception sometimes, if you want to play that way, sure, it involves all these kind of things, but actually it's almost like the people involved in the hobby are so strong of character and so kind of personable and ethical and just genuinely good people that we can do that in a way that is, you know, that doesn't mean we're narcissists. It doesn't mean that we're all psychopaths that are all just out there to take things from people. You know, so, and I think the quality of the people in the hobby is its biggest strength. And, you know, and I'm really hoping that we can use that quality of the people in the hobby to help address, you know, what I've articulated and what I think a lot of people, you know, this isn't just me. I think a lot of people see this, and a lot of people are very aware of this, is the hobby's glaring weakness.
Well, self-evidently so. And from a North American point of view, we've actually made some progress in that regard in the last few years, but it's one of those things, you see how much progress you made, which emphasizes how much progress you need to make. It just sort of emphasizes it's more. You know, I neglected to do this earlier, but a little biographical information would probably be interesting to our audience. You mentioned a little bit about what you do. I know you live in Canberra, don't you? Tell us a little bit about, you know, where you are, what you do when you're not playing diplomacy.
Sure. Yeah, so I live in Canberra. It's the capital city of Australia. It's the Washington, D.C. of Australia is probably the easiest way to describe it. So, you know, like everyone else who lives in Canberra, I work for the Australian government. As I said, I work in violence prevention and gender equality. So do broadly what we call policy work. It's, you know, writing ideas and coming up with a variety of different concepts and kind of, you know, evidence-based ways of approaching government work to make sure that we're achieving our goals in gender equality and violence prevention. Outside of work, I play diplomacy. Obviously, I do a lot of running. So I'm a trail runner. I do just marathons at this point. I haven't quite cracked the ultra marathon level yet, but, you know, off running in the mountains a lot and do a lot of that. I play a bit of music here and there. I volunteer with a kind of men's masculinity, healthy masculinities mentoring organization. I have a podcast, Christian Buddhist Bar. If you want to search it anywhere, it's called A Christian and a Buddhist Walk Into a Bar, about theology, and we do some events associated with that. And yeah, that's part of what I do, and I always forget what else I do because I do so much.
That's good. I mean, I find that most people who are good at this game are busy people. Not all of them, but most of them are busy people and have lots of things going on in their lives. It's just part of what that's that kind of person. I think gets attracted to the higher level play of the game. So
absolutely.
Well, you may have already mentioned this, but do you have a wish list of things you'd like to have happen for the diplomacy hobby? I mean, obviously we've talked about gender equality, you know, and other forms of diversity being important, but do you have sort of a little wish list of things you'd like to have happen?
Yeah, I mean, number one is fixing the gender equality issue. Number two is fixing the diversity issue more broadly. I think, I will reiterate those because those are really important. But I think, as well, I mean, obviously we'd like to see lots of people at tournaments. We'd like this to become bigger. The WDC has inspired me to put a bit more effort into trying to grow the Canberra-based hobby and kind of build up the people who are playing here. But I think, getting young people involved, getting people who can, as I said, I learned in a history class, there's a lot of knowledge that you can gain as a young person, not just about history and geography and negotiation or whatever else, but also just about how to approach things and how to build relationships and how to form connections with people that I think are really valuable and important. So, bigger tournaments, more young people, and yeah, as we said a few times here, absolutely more diversity and a much better gender balance.
Well, that's good. Any final thoughts for our audience? I appreciate that answer very much. Any other final thoughts for our audience?
No, I think I've kind of covered most of it. I will say one thing, and I think that's that. I genuinely want to thank everybody. I feel pretty new to this hobby. I mean, I know I've been playing for a few years, but I feel like I'm new to the kind of the hobby as a community, and I really want to thank everyone for welcoming me and for bringing me in, for letting a little old player like me win something. It's kind of nice, but also just that everyone for being themselves and for being these genuinely great people. I have a deep respect for so many people who play this game. Everyone who's playing the top board, everyone who was organizing the tournament, everyone there. But also, I just think this idea of play how you want to play. Play the game how you want to be a person in the world. I mentioned before, I was a very bad diplomacy player for a long time, and I left the hobby for a little bit. I went traveling. I came back, and I decided, and I said to myself, I'm only going to do this if I can play in a way that aligns with who I want to be as a person, and that's someone who's trustworthy, someone who is values-based, someone who does things kind of with an ethical foundation that I feel like that I want to approach my life. And I suddenly found that as soon as I did that, I got to become a much better player. So, I think when people are trying to get better at the game and when they're trying to, improve to a way that they can potentially come and win a tournament, it pays to know who you are, and it pays to tune into that and to follow your gut instincts about who you are and who you want to be, and reflect who you are as a person on the diplomacy board. Don't try and be someone else. Don't try and play in a certain way because you saw someone play in a certain way online or whatever else. Be yourself, be the kind of person you want to be. And, my suspicion is that that's how you'll find success in the game.
Oh, that's great advice, Jamal. Thanks for so much for being on the show. And again, congratulations on your victory.
Thank you. And thanks for everything you do, David.
Next up, here's our interview with the top board champ and UK resident Bradley Grace of the recently concluded Olympus Extended Deadline Tournament, held over the past several months on the Olympus Discord server and played on the Backstabber platform. Bradley, welcome to Deadline.
Thank you for having me, David.
Sure. Let me start by just saying congratulations on you being the winner of the inaugural season of Olympus.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can finally sleep now. I've stopped playing Extended Deadline, so that's nice.
Well, my guess is you haven't stopped for long, but maybe not. Can you tell us a little bit, like some of our audience may not understand much about you, where you came from, but tell us where you are, what you do when you're not playing diplomacy.
Yeah, so I'm in the northwest of England. I'm 25, and I work as an accounts assistant while training to be an accountant. So that's sort of life at the moment. Just work, sleep, occasionally play some games.
Well, I'm glad you were able to fit in some games, here and there. How did you get into this game in particular? And by that, I mean, of course, diplomacy.
Yeah, so I started, I'd say, midway through 2021. Just played some online extended deadline games. Found it through mostly YouTube content, actually. I'd never heard of the game Diplomacy before then. But just started playing some online games. And then at some point I realized, I'm not doing too bad. I might want to find other people who are just as dedicated to this. and that just opened the door to a lot of different styles of play and a lot more fun people to hang out with. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun over the past 2 years, I'd say.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's been fun to watch you play. What about Diplomacy keeps bringing you back?
Initially, it's one of those things where you like it because you're good at it. And I look back at some of the games I played when I was new, and I'm like, no, you weren't actually that good. But what keeps me going really is just the people. You build social connections in a way that you can't find in many other games. And then every game is different. It doesn't matter that the map's the same, certain situations look the same. Every game is different because every relationship is different. And there's always something fascinating about how can I play this situation, because it's something that you've never seen before. And that's the case in any game you play. You're never going to see the same situation twice. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let's talk about Olympus itself. Tell us a little bit about how the tournament worked and how the games were played in the Olympus event.
Yeah, so all of them had a set deadline of 1912. The first round was more of a sort of reliability check, I would say. It's sort of just anyone can join the tournament. It's all a lot of fun, but in order to progress, you have to be reliable and half decent at the game. And then there was a second round, which was the top 28 players. Everyone plays 2 games at once, so 2 games simultaneously. And it was based on you get a certain amount of points depending on how you do. I can't remember exactly what the scoring system was, and then the top 7 played the top board, so it was 3 rounds of play.
Well, you know what? Who cares what the scoring system was if you won? Big deal. Doesn't matter what the scoring system is. You won the thing.
I qualified 7th from the semi-finals, so I had to care about the scoring system a little bit just to get to the final. But yeah,
I'm sure I was being a little facetious there, but you did make the top board and you won it. But tell me what stands out. What stands out to you about your experiences in the preliminary rounds that you played?
I do have a fun story about the first round game. I drew Russia, which usually is not too bad for me. And there was a strong tactical player in Austria, and then Italy and Turkey were sort of new players. And I was like, oh, everyone should gang up on Austria. Like they're a threat. Let's get them. And then everything just sort of fell correctly for me. And it got to the point where I was on like 12 centers in 1903 or something ridiculous. And the position allowed me to go for a solo. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for this. And if they stop me, they stop me. Who cares? I'm probably making it to the next round anyway from this position. So I decided, why not? I'm going to go for it. And it ended in 1904. So that was fun.
I believe I remember watching that game, actually.
Yeah, so I know I did in a similar Russia where I got to a 1906 solo about a year ago now.
Okay.
So that was sort of the record I was trying to beat. If they stopped me by it was 1906, I would just offer a draw. But there was a part of me that was like, I'm going to beat this record that I've already set. So just went for it.
You know, if you're beating your own records and your goal is to beat your own records, then you're in a pretty small category of people, like the Michael Jordans of basketball or the Jim Browns of football or somebody like that. If you're beating your own records as what your challenge is.
They beat other really, really great players. I can't set those same records against the top players, I don't think. But yeah, it's sometimes fun.
Mostly I was just making American sports references, knowing that you were like, who the hell is he talking about? That's mostly what I was doing.
I recognize the name Michael Jordan, okay?
Okay. That's good. Well, you've had success, obviously, both in this face-to-face format as well as in this extended deadline format. You won SpireCon last year in the UK. How would you compare the two formats, and what does it take to do well in both? You know, the extended deadline versus the face-to-face versus the virtual face-to-face, which I know you've also had success in.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually say I've had success in virtual face-to-face yet. I'm hoping that changes, but not yet anyway. I think that there are massive distinctions between the three. The difference Extended Deadline has is just you don't have to worry about time management. You've got 24 or 48 hours to talk to everyone. Some formats have even longer that I haven't played. And you just have the time to talk to everyone, and no one sees you talking to other people as well. And that element is how I started. So when I first transitioned to virtual face-to-face, I struggled a lot with not only the time it takes to talk to people, but the time it takes to figure out the right tactics. So I think I spent 6 months just consistently losing. I had about 8 games and 1 shared top and a few eliminations. It wasn't what I was used to. So I was like, something is wrong here. I have no idea what it is. And that's the same with a lot of people who are new. And I just looked at it and was like, oh, I need to improve that tactical area. So I started playing like 5-minute gumbo games often just to improve rapidly on tactics. And then, as you mentioned, I won Spirecon, and that was big for, I guess, a subconscious reason, and that was I gained a lot of confidence. So any game I came into after that, I spoke with, I guess, a level of authority that I didn't have before. And that helps, especially in virtual, just being confident in what you're saying. If you go into a game and you're like, oh, I'm not sure, I'm like, you just don't seem reliable. So once I had that tournament win, which was, you know, it was a good tournament. It was a very nice experience, but that sort of just gave me the confidence to then go forward and do okay after that. Yeah.
Well, you know, confidence is a good thing to have in life in addition to in diplomacy. So that's a great lesson for people to take from this experience. You've also played a fair amount of league games, I think. How do you think league play is different from any of the formats we just mentioned?
So I probably have a different opinion than everyone else who plays leagues, and that is I play every single game to get the best possible result in those games. I don't like some people focus on long-term reputation or by like making allies so that those same people work together again. There's all these different considerations, and I just look at a board and I'm like, I'm going to go for my best result. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to work with an ally throughout the game. If that's my best option, I'm going to go for it. And often that's how I play more of an alliance-based game. But in league play specifically, you just got to go for. I just go for the result, and then what happens after that. I've had a few debates with other people saying that that's not the right way to go, but it's worked out okay.
Hey, don't let anybody tell you not to do that. You be you, and there's absolutely nothing invalid about playing diplomacy that way. That's the way I have played in the past. I look at it as my job is to do the best for the country I'm playing in this game.
Yeah. So I've had some experience recently playing face-to-face in the London club, and they play like 1907 games. No one cares about, like, everyone stabs everyone event like towards the end, just C-Diplo essentially. So that sort of dynamic of, yeah, we're going to fight at the end and we're going to be friends afterwards. We're going to go to the bar and have a laugh about it. So that sort of element is different to how some people play. And I enjoy those types of games. It's not, there's no right way to play the game, but that's how I enjoy to play.
Yeah, the only thing I tell people about playing C-Diplo style or 1907 into game is it's perfectly fine to adapt to that system. You just got to be careful you don't play that way when you're not playing in a C-Diplo system, because that doesn't work in other formats.
Oh yeah, and I know I'm at a weird stage in diplomacy at the moment where I can see what I need to improve on. I just haven't done it yet. I tried to do it recently on a top board, and I accidentally used that faulty logic to mess up my entire game. So it's quite hard to change styles if you're used to something. So you're definitely correct. Being adaptable is important.
Yeah, that just comes with experience. And how dare you make mistakes? I've never made mistakes in playing the game before. How dare you do such a thing? All right, let's talk about the power selection for the top board of Olympus, and then talk a little bit about your strategy in general coming into the game.
Yeah, so I was the seventh seed, so there wasn't any choice for me. I knew I was going to get either Austria or Turkey, and I actually really wanted Turkey, but I was under the assumption I'm probably going to get Austria. So I spent quite a long time just looking at games where Austria did well and what it means for them to do well. And usually it's just a simple case of don't get attacked by more than one person and you should be fine. If two or more come after you, you're probably in trouble as Austria. But just get two people who they don't even have to be allies with you. Just keep them away from you. It's fine. And as for other strategies coming to the game, there was a lot of people in that game that I knew already based on past relationships, mostly whether from in that tournament or just I knew them in the hobby. So there was just an element of understanding how people think. And I think that became a big part as the game went on, is I understood how people thought more than they did. I think I had a good grasp on most of the people on the top board, and there was no one else who had that, essentially.
Gotcha. Well, I tell you, watching the coverage on the Diplomats YouTube channel, which, by the way, I'm going to link to the bottom of the show notes for this interview because they've got great coverage of every move of the game. But watching that coverage, I was struck by just how, frankly, how well you dominated the early turns of this game. And so that's what it looked like. How did that really go?
Yeah, it was. You're quite accurate in that description. The first year was sort of. I played a game as Austria quite recently where I took a big risk in Fall of 01 and it backfired and cost me the game. Because normally if you take a big risk as a central power, it can either go really well or really poorly. And I took it. I don't know why I did it, actually. There's certain tactical reasons why I did it, but I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go for this in Fall of 01 and support my Russian ally into Romania instead of actually supporting myself to Greece. And that sort of just built immediate trust with Russia in a way where I could essentially just, like, I've already took the risk. I've already done these things. I can just sort of suggest things quite politely and just push people in certain directions now that I've established that trust. I had a similar thing with Italy. It was less committal and more just, we're not going to attack each other, it's fine. And then the last part that was very important was being honest with Turkey while I'm attacking them. So every move I did in the first 3 turns of the game, I was attacking Turkey. But at the same time, I was being honest and just saying, hey, sorry, this is what I'm doing. And I probably played with Andre, who was in Turkey, more than anyone else on the top board. So I knew he respected honesty. And I also knew that everyone else was lying to him. So he eventually just turned around and offered to help me dominate the game. And the moment that happened, it was quite straightforward because I knew he was being honest about it.
Yeah, and he really did help you do that. But later in the game, it seemed like there was a little bit of a twist, and it became more of a horse race about whether you were going to win this game. How did that happen?
So I got paranoid. Is the simple answer. There were certain things he was asking for that, like, they were acceptable in an alliance. Don't get me wrong; they're more than acceptable. But given the deal we had, I was like, why are you asking for that? And instead of just saying these things, I just decided to get in my own head and paranoid when it turns out he was never going to stab me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stick to this deal, but I'm going to just try and angle some things to make sure that he can't stab me. And of course, he used that to morally justify actually stabbing me. So then I was essentially facing what was a 4v1, and I just had to scramble and try and hold on to as much as possible.
Well, you did overcome that and, sail on to victory. How did that happen?
So every turn, I was just throwing whatever I could at the wall and seeing what sticks. Mostly, the reason this was successful is even though I got big very quickly, the only 2 people who were annoyed at me, pretty much, like, genuinely annoyed to the point where they're just going to attack me and not going to stop, were Italy and Russia, who were already eliminated.
Right.
So there's four. I've got four people on the board, and yes, I'm the big target, so everyone's going to attack me and play the balance of power game. But no one's mad at me. So the moment I look a bit weaker, the moment I'll give Germany Warsaw, I'll give England Moscow, and I can just hold on to 8 and be fine because like I've not burnt any bridges with any one of these people. They're just playing the game. So the moment I look a bit weaker and I'm chunking in, and then there's the occasional like trying to make a deal, and sometimes things will stick. So you can say, hey, look, just don't attack me. There's a bunch more dots that you can easily hold over here. You don't have to. You're not going to keep hold of Sev as England. That's not going to work. You can't dive into Budapest as Germany. I'm just going to surround them with armies, and it's not something you're going to keep. And it was just throwing whatever I could at the wall, seeing what stuck. And the moment something stuck, and someone made a move against someone else, they all got mad at each other because why aren't you attacking Austria? He's the one in the lead. And I would obviously play into that and tell people that, hey, they've leaked move. Like I'd go to Turkey pretty much every turn and say, hey, Germany and England leaked all your moves, by the way. They didn't, but I'll say it because I got the guess right. So why not? And that just increased their tension between each other. And eventually it all cracked and I came out on the other side the winner.
Well, you certainly did. Before we leave the subject of Olympus, what do you have to say to the organizer or to the other players?
Yeah, so Bob, who organized it, Bob Zawilda, he's run an incredible tournament. I mean, for a first time running something of that size and building it from scratch, with the amount of promotion he was able to put into it as well, was incredibly impressive. I'm sure that the next season will be even bigger. I've seen the list of people that are playing, and it's quite impressive. And the other players, I mean, I could sit here and spend hours talking about every player who I've played with on that top board because we spent so long talking with each other. But I would say that there is one person in particular, and that's Nick, who was playing England. And was as new as I was when I first started playing big tournaments. I think he's played 20 games total. And the amount of potential he has given his diplomatic skill is unbelievable. He gets the tactics down. You'll see him win every tournament that's around. It's insane.
Well, good. So, I think we'll be on the lookout for him in future events then.
Yeah, I'm going to convince him to play some virtual eventually.
Good. All right. Well, Bradley, let's end on a broader subject. You've participated now in the wider diplomacy hobby for several years. How do you think our hobby is doing?
It's doing well as far as I know. I don't know what it was like, say, before COVID or before virtual just started. I don't have that frame of reference. But as far as I can see, there's still a new good group of players coming in. Maybe it's not as many as we would like. We'd always want more people to play. But every newcomer I see, I'm like, oh, most of them stick around. And I think that is a good sign to show we've got a good community that helps people. As long as they find us, then they're more than likely going to stay. But also say that, and I sort of hinted at this when I talked about the virtual scene. Maybe this is just me, but I think the virtual is actually the hardest format to build connections in game. So what you'll often find is a new player will join and they'll struggle. And it could be for a strategic reason, they're new to the game, or is a tactical reason, whatever. But I think the hardest part is actually building connections within a game. And you'll often find people will just sort of be more attracted to people they've played with before. And I mean, you probably heard this a million times, but I've seen a couple of waves of newer faces being like, hey, why isn't anyone be my friend? Or why isn't anyone wanting to ally with me? And I found that the first time when I first started playing virtual. I think there's just a difficulty when it's 15-minute turns playing just via voice. You can't read someone's body language like I found in face-to-face is incredibly important.
Oh, yeah.
Or, yeah, it's that is a different level and skill that you just have to pick up on its own. And I think people who, let's say you're new to the game and things aren't going well for you at the start, just keep going. It might not be that you're losing because everyone's better than you. It might just be you've not built enough connections, or you don't know how to communicate via voice as well. Like I said, when I started building more confidence, I started having more success, and that all these things just happen with time. If you're struggling, just stick it out, and you'll eventually get some results.
Yeah, it occurs to me that maybe we need a few opportunities for people to sort of meet and talk to each other and socialize outside of the actual game in the virtual setting, whether that be by audio or video or both.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think people need to make use of just generally hanging out in voice chats. I mean, I've seen it a couple of times when, say, a game's going on that I'm not playing, but there's the GM and a couple of other people spectating. I'll join the room and have a 5-hour-long chat with someone one day because I'm doing nothing that weekend. And it's just, you just socialize with people. And if that was promoted more, it might be a good idea to both teach people how to play and also just hang around with people who play often.
That's right, yeah. All right, well, this is your final chance to give us some thoughts for our audience. It could be strengths that you see in the hobby or challenges we think we need to overcome or anything else you want to tell our audience.
Yeah, I would say the best thing I want to say is just play how you feel. Follow your gut. If you want to, I'm bringing this back to how people play the game, but it's sort of true off the board as well. Just follow your instincts, and things will eventually work out because it's sort of an interesting topic to bring up, but it's sort of not, if you stick to your gut instincts, even if it all goes wrong, you can live with it. So just don't be pressured by other people into doing things you don't like, essentially, is what I wanted to get at.
Yeah, I've said to many people before, you should play to your strengths and lean into what your strengths are and not try to just emulate what somebody else does. It's got to be something that feels right and feels comfortable for you.
Yeah, definitely. And, we've got a lot of good players around the hobby. You could play a top board and all of a sudden everyone's attacking you because someone's just controlling the entire thing. Things are totally not bitter about last weekend.
No, I can tell that you are totally not bitter about last weekend. And there will be an interview with the winner of the Summer Classic on this same episode of Deadline. It's just not you, Bradley Grace.
It's all her fault. I'm not that good yet. It's okay.
That's a good way to end this interview. Bradley, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much, David.
And now, rounding out the Winner's Circle interviews, let's have a pleasant conversation with Saren Kwok, winner of the Virtual World Diplomacy Community's Summer Classic for 2023, a virtual face-to-face event which concluded with a top board played on September the 2nd. Saren, welcome back to Deadline.
Thanks, David.
It's been really a long time, and it's been too long. For any who missed your previous appearances on the show, tell us a little bit about where you are, what you do when you're not dominating the map of Europe.
So I am currently traveling in Mexico City, hence running home through the rain a bit earlier. But usually I live in the UK on the outskirts of Greater London. Outside of diplomacy, I'm alternatively a failed novelist and a lapsed dungeon master. During the day, I program for an AI code generation startup.
Well, that sounds very interesting. And I mean, all of it does, including the failed GM part or the lapsed dungeon master part. Can't wait to hear more about that, but not in this interview because this is about a diplomacy game. So how were you introduced to diplomacy originally?
So during lockdown, I think that was like the first wave of COVID when tons of us who currently play joined. I stumbled on Marcus's videos on YouTube. For those who don't know, Marcus, also called Diplostrats, I believe, on YouTube, is one of the best diplomacy content producers out there, alongside DBN itself, of course. And Marcus can often be found giving pretty really in-depth tactical analysis. It's a great channel. I encourage anybody learning the game to check it out.
And by really in-depth, we mean really in-depth.
Yeah.
Never met an hour he didn't want to add to his broadcast. But he knows I'm a fan of his show. Saren, what do you find particularly attractive about diplomacy?
I think it might have been, I can't remember who it was who said it recently, but the fact that there's like no real skill ceiling to diplomacy. I find that every time I come back, there's like something fresh and there's more to learn. I told Ian during our game together on the top board, Ian was Austria and I was Italy. I told him that I learned so much from him that game. And that was absolutely true, because I find that every time I come back, just there's like a new interaction of players, and there's so much more that, you know, kind of alters how I think about the game. And, you know, it's never quite stagnant.
Oh, I could not agree more. I still learn about the game, and I've been doing it a really long time, and I still learn about the game all the time. I mean, it is a never-ending cornucopia of experience. All right. Well, you're here because you just got finished winning the VWDC Summer Classic in spectacular, so I would argue, comeback fashion. Way to go, Saren.
Thanks.
All right, so before we talk about the top board itself, could you give us a little flavor of the event overall for those who have not played in the Summer Classic or have not, you know, maybe not seen the DBN coverage of that event?
Sure. David, the Summer Classic is one of two kind of virtual original tournaments alongside the VWDC, which takes place in December and kind of has a similar format. So this year's organizers, McAllis and Johnny, are both like active virtual players themselves. And so they did, in my opinion, an incredible job of kind of like blending the best parts of face-to-face and virtual. Just like their familiarity with like the format and like the kind of little nuances of it, like made it like really elevated the event, and like, you know, built in like a lot of different like interesting things that made it like kind of different from other events that I've played. And like, especially for like people who kind of can't commit to like the whole year-long commitment of a league or like an extended press game, like I find it like a tournament like that is a really good opportunity to play.
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. Now, this was not your first success in this event, was it?
I won the inaugural Summer Classic 2 years ago, and then followed that up the next year with getting eliminated by losing to a solo in the qualifying rounds. So that is to say, I am very happy to be back.
Well, it's great to see you back. But winning twice out of 3 years is really something. Tell us what the secret sauce is. Give us your secret ingredient list. How do you do this?
Maybe I can't give out all of the secrets, David, but yeah. I'd say that one thing that really came to the forefront for me this tournament was how important it is, especially in the virtual format, to know like when to talk to whom. I found so one example was in my second qualifying round. I was playing France, and Maika, who is like this really talented up and coming newer player, she was playing Turkey. And there was like one critical turn, I think, where like I grabbed her like near the end of the turn, didn't really think we had too much to discuss, but there was just one small thing with like her orders and her set of tactics that I suggested, like kind of like a different set of orders that I thought was more likely to work for her. And it turned out when it adjudicated that was the set of orders that stopped her from losing one to Italy, who I was currently at war with. So I think that one conversation really like helped give me an edge in the game. And like that just underscores the importance of knowing when to talk to people who you aren't like necessarily immediately working with.
Yeah, it's hard to fit in talking to everybody you want to or need to in a 15-minute negotiation or any time limited negotiation period, but so important to try to fit that in when you can. As you point out, that's a great observation. What else about the preliminary round sort of stands out to you? I mean, we want to all grow up to be like Saren, so give us some ideas of how we do that based on your experiences in the preliminary rounds.
If you want to grow up to be like Saren, then first aim to grow up to be like David Hood, and then you might be able to aim high and hit low. But no, like it really struck me, like just the kind of quality and diversity of the new players, because like it's been a while since I've really like played virtual that much. So coming back, it was kind of like there were all these new players, like a few of the old regulars as well, but like kind of like it was really nice to come back and like see so many new faces and like to kind of like learn from their new styles, because like I have to say the meta has evolved a lot since I last played. So
yes, and continues to evolve, and isn't that fun, honestly?
Yeah.
All right, so going into the top board, there is a power selection process, the Paris method. I'm sure you had a strategy coming in. You picked Italy. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was something I thought a little bit about. I was pretty sure going in that Jackson would take France on the first pick. It just kind of fit with what I knew of how he plays. And so I knew like I wasn't really going to be optimizing for power. Like I also thought I was afraid of like kind of a repeat of the very first VWDC back in 2020. So on that board, you had like a bunch of favorites, a bunch of really strong face-to-face tournament players who made the top board, and they all piled into the West. And they kind of fought each other to a standstill for most of that game, while Turkey, who was like the last seed on that board, like that was Morgante, like ended up just growing and taking the win, like facing what you might argue is like a relatively less experienced field in the East. So I was like wary of the situation where like I joined Ed and Jackson in the West, and then like somebody runs away with it in the East. I don't really have any control over that. So I'd already won on Russia, so I was like, let's try something else. So that left Italy.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Italy, of course, has some recent notable successes in top boards anyway.
Yeah, I think Brandon won DBNI on Italy quite recently.
That sounds right. Yes, I believe that's right. Well, how did the negotiations in the East in particular go in the early stages of the game?
I'm glad you asked, David, because, wow, like those negotiations were really something. My previous experience on top boards was kind of like everybody like kind of like has to extend some measure of each other. People like go in, there's a certain amount of trust and expectations of what people would do. This was totally different. The thing that really like was like the oh shit, this is different moment for me was like in 1902. I had been working with Ian, Austria. I was Italy. He had loaned me Trieste so I could go to Aegean in 1901. And then in 1902, he took it back. This was not negotiated. I considered this to be a stab. But the thing is, I don't think Ian considered it to be a stab. I think that if he was speaking in total sincerity, he would say that it was not. And that was like the moment when I realized like this is a different kind of negotiation. The norms are different. The way people see the game is different. And like I have to adapt to that. Like it took me a while to adapt to that. But like later on in the game, there was like a similar situation where Bradley kind of equivocated on whether he was going to move out of the Black Sea, and he ended up not doing it. And then he was like, oh, but I never really said I would move out of the Black Sea. And I, you know, like with other players, I would react very strongly to this. I would take this as like unacceptable. And like, I would basically say, we're over this game. But the kind of like play that I had seen from like Ian and Bradley so far, they were not that kind of player. They were like much more positionally focused. They were much less, there was like much less of like an immediate trust given. So I did not immediately collapse relations with Bradley. And like what I did instead was next turn, I was like, okay, Bradley, you're going to give it to me straight right now. It's a yes or a no, no, maybe. Are you moving out of the Black Sea? And I found that this kind of like really like getting to the point of it and like making sure that people committed was what was necessary to get things done in this East.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question too, because the answer was very illuminating. You know, as an observer to the game, it appeared to me that the France of Jackson Roberts was really dominant in many moves of this game. He had an alliance with Ed Sullivan's Germany, as you mentioned, or I think maybe you mentioned. How confident were you that you could come back from where you were in the mid game here, given how strong Jackson's position was?
I was ready to draw. I told Jackson, like, I'll draw here. I don't think my position is going anywhere good. But like neither Bradley, he was Russia, nor Ian really wanted to draw. And like, I'm reasonably certain that Ed would have privately vetoed no matter what he publicly claimed or told Jackson. So the game continued.
Yes, I doubt that Ed was ready to give up on his own chances at that part of the game. Doubt it very seriously. Well, eventually you did come out on top. How did that happen?
Well, the simple answer is that I got lucky, but I'm sure the viewers would like to hear something more.
Yes, let's give more of an answer than that. Yes.
Yes, I think there was like a real chain of events that began with Jackson becoming extremely worried that Bradley was going to run away with the game. Now, that wasn't my assessment of the board at that time, and I'm still not sure whether Jackson was sincere about that, but he certainly moved in a way that indicated that at the very least that was what he wanted everybody to like really believe, that he was very worried about Bradley winning the game. Like his fear of Bradley was why he kind of vacated the Western Med and the Gulf of Leon and pulled back to his line, because he wanted B and Ian to go fight Bradley. If he hadn't done that, none of the ensuing events would have been possible. And then there was also the fact that Ian did want to fight Bradley, right? Like I only have so much control over that. I made it known to Ian that like I would support him. I would do my best to support him if he wanted to pursue that. But like that's kind of like a thing that he has to choose that he wants to do it. And then there was also this thing where Bradley, it turned out, had told, like Ian had already like stabbed Bradley twice at this point in the game, or 3 times, and Bradley was like, it's a 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing. And so it just happened that the turn after Jackson pulled back, when Ian again moved at Bradley, that was the final strike. And and so that was what allowed Bradley to be like, okay, Saren, I'm going to help you.
Well, that was obviously critical to the outcome. There's no question about that. Well, let's make a little bit of a broader question. You have had significant success in this game on multiple levels, I would say, not just in virtual, but you won, Weaselmoot face-to-face tournament last year. I think it was last year. You've been on the DBNI final. How different is it to succeed in negotiations through text, like on an extended deadline game, or through audio on Discord, as opposed to in person?
I think there's a number of different skills and definitely a bit of a learning curve. A lot of virtual players, I think, like we get to the physical board and like we initially, like it's like jumping in the deep end, looking at a physical board and actually having to make sure each order gets written like absolutely correctly. But that's like kind of the surface layer of the challenge. Then there's like other things that, like you're in person, like the poker face element kind of like negotiations is much more important, for example. And those are all like tactical kinds of things that you may have like more or less mileage with. But on the flip side as well, there's like some skills in virtual I find that are often overlooked, even by virtual players. For example, like kind of visibility management, I think, is a very important thing in virtual that often gets overlooked, because the Discord channel means that everybody can see who's talking to whom at like pretty much all times. And like, if you're in a room like with 3 people, that's something that people will watch out for. If you're in like a room for like half the time with like just one other person, then people can see that and they will respond to that to like a much greater degree than in face-to-face.
That makes sense, because it's all right there in front of you.
Yeah.
Well, these events like the Summer Classic top board or the DBNI top board, any of these kind of pressure cooker situations, they can be very stressful. What would your advice be to players that are in that kind of environment, or a face-to-face game for some people can be very stressful? How would you recommend that people deal with that as they're learning the game?
Drink lots of water, eat.
Good advice. It's very good advice.
Yeah. I think it's easy to overlook, because when I first started playing, like I would get hungry, I would get thirsty so easily over the game. And like, like the amount that you're talking, I really think like these days I kind of like, if I'm playing virtual, I'm practically like guzzling water like every second that I'm not actively talking.
I think that's honestly really good advice. All right, I want you to do us a favor now, Sarah. I want you to tell us that there's something about your game that you think you need to work on, because I think it'll make the rest of us feel better if there's something about your game that you think you need to work on.
Yeah, I first started seriously considering when I lost to a solo in the qualifying of Summer Classic last year, just how much there was to do in terms of broadening my game. I think, like, to put it like a little bit reductively, like my game up until that point, all of the success I'd enjoyed so far, like had been like acquired through like a relatively narrow style of play. And like, it was the kind of like experiences I had last year that made me realize like I really needed to like kind of work on like increasing like my repertoire if I wanted to like, you know, play with the best. And so that's something that I still think I have like tons and tons of work to do. I think I've improved this season in terms of like working with new players and players I have not played with before. This was definitely one of my big weaknesses before, but I think I still have like a lot more to learn in terms of like positional play. This was like a heavy style right now. I think that's quite heavy in the virtual meta right now, and also like kind of more dynamic play and like play in situations where like I don't get off to a good start.
Well, the comment, I like all of those comments, but the one about learning how to play with new players is something that I would argue there are many experienced players that totally fail at this, and it limits their options drastically on a board.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point. All right, enough about you, Sarah and Kwok. Let's talk about the hobby as a whole for a minute. I'm asking all the interview subjects this episode some similar questions. What do you see as the strengths and conversely the weaknesses of our hobby right now?
I think a main strength is that we have like greater integration between like the various different diplomacy communities than we have had at like any point in the past. Like it's really refreshing to kind of like see people like play extended deadline and then play virtual and then play face-to-face, and like you kind of like see people in extended deadline and then like you meet them at a face-to-face tournament. Like I don't play extended deadline myself, but like I follow the game somewhat, so like it is always exciting whenever I see like an extended deadline star, so to speak, in virtual, or even meet them face to face. I think weaknesses, we still have a lot that we could do in terms of making the game more accessible to new players. I think one of the things that I really struggled with when I first started playing is that there is a lot of diplomacy kind of teaching material out there, and a lot of it is very bad. Or like maybe not bad, but like poorly
outdated might be one way to put it.
Yeah, outdated or poorly contextualized. And I find that kind of hurts people if they're like really keen and they come into the game and they're like, why are people doing all this stuff? It's like they're playing like with some kind of secret code that I don't understand. So I think like making the current state of the game more accessible, which DBN does do. And like I think DBN is doing a great job. Like we could do a lot more work on that though.
Well, with respect to those weaknesses you just identified, what do you think we could do about that, or do you have any ideas?
Like I'm considering, I think like more written material. So I am considering like publishing some myself. I don't know. I used to write a lot about diplomacy. Haven't had as much time recently, but like even up through last year, like I wrote a lot, and like I just recently went back and looked at kind of some of what I wrote in the past, and like I'm thinking of like kind of making it kind of like editing it and polishing it up so that it can be published. But I think like kind of the cross-channel promotion between like the different diplomacy media channels is also really great. Like I know we already talked about Marcus earlier in this episode, but there's tons of other great channels. There's the Diplomats, which I think does really great content, and like there's the Briefing, you know, anything like that I think is really great for getting people into the game.
Yeah, you're totally right. Any other final thoughts for our deadline audience?
Just that Moot is in a couple weeks, so if you haven't signed up and if you're on the fence, come to Moot. Sabee is an amazing organizer, and if it's anything like last year, it's going to be a great event.
Yes, I plan to be in Chicago myself, so that'll be great. And Sarah, thank you so much for being back on Deadline. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, David.
Thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this edition of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. To review all of our other broadcast offerings, visit our website at www.diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.